So this will be mainly a chance for you to ask questions to Jim, and I will just chip in occasionally. But I thought I'd ask one question, take the privilege of the chair, just to start, which is that, you know, we were chatting last night actually about your test flying career before you were an astronaut, and you said that you broke the sound, well, you took a Phantom up to Mach 2, which you seem very proud of. And I also saw a quote, which you may or may not have said, which was about Apollo 13, that you felt that as a mission, it was an enjoyable mission in hindsight because it was a real test pilot's mission. So I don't know if you said that, but I read you'd said it. So I wanted to ask you about that part of your career, about test flying.
Well, that quote that I made is true. After I got down on the ground and I dusted myself off, and I said that, yeah, because we had to do things that were not on the spur of the moment, but not planned for. That last flight, that last maneuver to get back into the corridor was something that we had thought about years before, but never really thought we were going to do it. And we had to do it manually. We didn't have any. So that was there. Yeah, I was a Navy test pilot. Went through test pilot school way back in 1960, and at a place called Pontefract, Maryland. About that time, the Navy was getting a lot of new aircraft. One was the Cutlass, one was the Crusader, one was the Panther, the Cougar, then we got the A-D, they call the little A. You've seen all these little planes that it's like the Sky Rays that we had, which was basically the Sky Ray was a German design that we had either captured or got from Germany at the time and tested it. And it was a pretty good airplane at that particular time. But the last plane I flew, and the one that I was sort of a manager with, was the Phantom. A beautiful airplane at that time, very stable. Bringing it aboard ship was easy. It almost flew itself. And now, of course, we have automatic systems on carriers, and they do fly themselves. But the Crusader, if you remember that, it was a long body airplane with the pilot sitting one up here, and you had to be careful. And it had a wing that went up like this. It's the only airplane that had what we call a variable incident wing, went up, and you had to take off with the wing up, of course, to get off. Otherwise, you would have dragged the tail on the ground trying to get off. But it was very unstable at carrier approaches. You would always come back and forth, and pilots had to be very, very careful bringing that airplane back.
And often when you see the reports or documentaries about the early NASA days, it seemed that there was a debate about whether test pilots would be the best astronauts. Is that again fiction, or was that debate present?
No, there was a debate there. It wasn't so much whether test pilots would make good astronauts. The debate was when they first got started with Project Mercury, who should we select to be astronauts? There were various answers to that. Why don't you have stuntmen? Hollywood stuntmen. They do all these crazy things. Well, I know. Why don't you have double amputees? Because you don't need legs in zero gravity. And use your hands, and that's about it. No, it was actually President Eisenhower that came and said, look, I suggest you take military test pilots because they have classifications out there, and there'll be a lot of classified things that they're still working with in those days. And they've gone through testing airplanes, and so they would be natural as a follow-on to spacecraft. And so that's how it happened.
So are there questions from the floor? You put your hand up, so there's many. So there are microphones coming down, so if you could wait for the microphone. The first one was right on the end there, and then we'll work our way down.
Hi, Jim. Yeah, thanks for the great talk. You mentioned Pete Conrad earlier. Now that he's sadly no longer with us, is there anybody around who still calls you Shaky?
What was it?
So that I didn't hear it well on the stage.
Pete Conrad used to have a nickname for you, Shaky. I just wondered if anybody calls you that now. No,
so
he's no
it's
longer
about
with us.
it's about
it's
nickname.
Shaky.
Shaky, yeah.
Yeah, I'll tell you the story of that. Pete Conrad was quite an individual. He'd be somebody you'd really like to listen to sometimes. We were doing a survival training in Nevada. And when it was finished, he and I were flying back to Houston, but in 2 different airplanes. And I was leading and he was on the wing. And I think we were short of fuel or something like that, but anyway, we started to turn into, at the airport, the land, and I flew into a thunderstorm. So he's going like this or like this, you know, he's calling me, you know, Shaky, because I was up and line, he's trying to keep with me. So that name sort of stuck, but I didn't mind it just around, you know, the guys, if he wants to call me Shaky. But after his mission, he went on one of these all around the world tours, and when he was in Russia, he said, you know, my companion was Shaky. And the Russian said, yeah, we got one of those too. But anyway, I called him Square Wave because he was all over the place.
So, yeah, there was perhaps one of those there, and then we'll switch over to this side. So you've got another microphone there.
Hello, Jim. You mentioned things that wouldn't exist without Apollo 13, and saw a film just last week, The Martian, and I think that probably wouldn't exist without Apollo 13. I wonder, have you seen it, and do you enjoy science fiction movies?
Well, I enjoy, I think the movies. Apollo 13, by the way, was a very accurate movie for those who have seen it. The little artistic license taken into it, but all the incidents were true, which is unusual for movie people to make a actual incident without hyping it up somehow. I saw The Martian. I don't know how many of you have seen that. It's kind of interesting, but if you look closely, when the astronaut fell and he cracked his helmet, he used duct tape to put over the helmet. So there's some leftovers from the old Apollo 13 that went into the Martian movie.
Okay, so someone in there.
I've been reading Frank Borman's book about Apollo 8, and he said that the multi-million-dollar space journey to the moon was almost wrecked because the windows fogged up and you couldn't see the moon when you got there. Is that right?
Did the windows fog up on Apollo 8? Apparently Frank Borman had said that the windows fogged up.
Well, there was some fogging. It was not fog as we know fog. It was material that had come over that degraded some of the photography attempts. But the Earthwise picture that you all saw was not touched. It was okay.
Okay, why not down at the front there?
Hi, you saw Apollo 13 checklist at an auction, and there was a concern whether you have a right to sell or not. And then Charlie Bolden had a discussion with you, but there was no agreement. And then a few months later, Obama passed a bill that all astronauts, like Apollo and Gemini astronauts, have the right to sell what they collect. So I'm curious, how did Obama know about the concern? And how did you influence the Congress to pass the bill? Thank you.
Well, that's kind of long. Brian, how about that?
Do you think that's too complicated an answer? It really is. It's
about selling artifacts? Well, I can tell you the story about that. We had started a thing called the Astronaut Scholarship Foundation. And one of the ways to raise money for scholars was to have astronauts donate artifacts that they'd had for many, many years. Nothing was really said. The artifacts that we had were things, mostly manuals, checklists, items like that. And we would donate them, and they would, once a year, maybe some of you, a lot of you I know that I've talked to, had gone down to the autograph show in Cape Kennedy for the Astronaut Scholarship Foundation. I had come up with a large or a little checklist for some time. That was the checklist that we used to transfer the guidance from the dying command module to the lunar module, which was not run up, and we had to transfer the certain angles into the lunar module computer, so that when we went from the command module into the lunar module, we would already know what our attitude was with respect to the celestial sphere. That's necessary for navigation. Otherwise, we wouldn't have any idea what our attitude was, and we couldn't navigate. I put that little thing on auction, and unbeknownst to me, that got to be quite popular. And finally, it went up to at that time, some pretty high value. But after there was a bidding and a winner, the NASA hierarchy, well, basically the legal part of the hierarchy, said, "Do you really own that?" What happened was some time ago there was a ruling that anything that NASA did not need, and this pertained to spacecraft, large structures and things like that, would automatically be owned by the Smithsonian. But things like checklists and books, we made ones for each flight, and then normally they said, you throw them away because we're making new ones for the next flight and all that. And some of the stuff we kept as collectibles for all the years. That little checklist I had for about 40 years, and when the value went up, they came out and said that, do you really own it? Well, that was not the big problem. I could have said, keep it or give it back to me or give it to NASA or Smithsonian. But it was the Astronaut Scholarship Foundation that had to auction off all the artifacts that they had to raise funds for scholars. And so we went to Congress to ask whether we could be relieved of that particular thing and let the system go. Otherwise, all the people who bought artifacts from Astronaut Scholarship Foundation would wonder whether they were legal, whether they legally owned them or not. Consequently, Congress passed a resolution that all the stuff that was kept by the astronauts for well over 40 years is essentially theirs.
A rare outbreak of common sense. So we haven't had any questions from the centre. So if you bring a microphone up, perhaps the white there and then the one behind.
Hello, Jim. You and I, like all the best people, are left-handed. Did that cause you any problems in the lunar module and the command module with the controls or anything like that?
Actually, being left-handed in the space program was an advantage. If you look at the Gemini capsule, it looks like the cockpit of an airplane, but the hand controller is in the center of between the two astronauts. We were all aviators, and when we were trained to fly airplanes, either right-handed or left-handed, you always flew the airplane because the throttle controls were here on the left side, and you use your right hand for controlling. So left-handed people learned through training to fly airplanes right-handed and control the power with left hands. Now, when we got into the Gemini, if I was the pilot just sitting on the right side, I had my left hand, which I was normally could use the controller. And if I was the commander on the right side, I had already learned to fly right-handed, and so I could do it one away. So it was an advantage to me. And besides, when I was just growing up, Being left-handed in those days, my parents tried to teach me to write, to eat and everything right-handed, and so I actually am ambidextrous. I can eat both ways. I hit balls right-handed. You know, I golf right-handed. I throw balls left-handed, and I eat either way. I could take my knife and my fork, cut my food, and I do not have to switch because I can use the fork right-handed. Go ahead.
And then there was one back there with the blue t-shirt on.
Hi. I know you didn't get a chance to use the science you got taught, but how much science did you get actually taught for, like picking up the rocks and things you were supposed to when you didn't get there, but you?
So the question was, did you get it?
How much science did you actually get to the teacher to do, like the picking up of the rocks and the things like that?
The question's about your science, your scientific training, the training that you did for going to the moon. Is there a lot of science? Did you get a chance to use that scientific training on the Apollo program?
Yes, in the flights, of course, the first two, Apollo 11 and Apollo 12, were basically in response to President Kennedy's commitment to land a man on the moon before the end of the decade. And we were essentially trying to beat the Russians for doing that. But on the third flight, and if you look at our patch, it says Ex Luna Scientia. This was going to be a scientific flight. This was going to look at the science of what we could do on the lunar surface. And for that training, we did a lot of travel looking at various areas that might help us. We went out to West Texas, we went to Hawaii, got on top of Kilauea, where the lava was still coming out, and we were looking at comparing the lava flows and the things with perhaps what we'd see on the lunar surface, and looking at the craters, the crater that's in Arizona that is still quite prominent from a meteorite, and so Apollo 13 was strictly a science flight. That was our training.
So why don't we get a question right from the back somewhere, because we have none from the back, is it? Look at that, right, the furthest corner away, in the dark. I should say we've got about 10 minutes left, I think.
Hi Jim, start by saying thank you for making the long journey over to the UK. It's been a fantastic lecture. My question
from the moon or from Chicago?
My question is, had the Russians N1 rocket been successful and they had landed a man on the moon roughly about the same time as Apollo, do you think the Apollo program would have been extended, or had there been any talks within NASA about how the program would have developed had the Russians been successful?
Well, let's see if I can answer that. Maybe Brian could help me, but we would have continued the program regardless of what the Russians had done. I mean, if they were successful in circumnavigating back in 1968, we would have still gone, because our program was to land on the moon, and the Russians, as we know now, had failures with their N1 rocket, which was the basic lunar landing vehicle for them. So even though they went around the moon first, because they did a lot of first before we did, so one more didn't make any difference to us. But we would have kept on going as the program did progress, regardless of what they did. And it was a great time, both having this contestants between, because it brought up a lot of science, both in the Soviet Union and in the United States. And we all learned a lot from them on what they were doing. And we finally, when perestroika and everything stopped and we got to know each other, we can, have exchange of information and science.
Okay, so, okay, what about this? There's a question down there, right at the front. I should say, just while the microphone's coming down, if you aren't aware, you probably are aware because you're all space fans, but the Cosmonauts exhibition at the Science Museum in London is tremendous at the moment. And there is a full-scale engineering mock-up of the Russian lunar lander in the Science Museum at the moment, which is on loan from Star City in Russia, and it's a remarkable thing if you haven't seen it. One astronaut, wasn't it? It was one astronaut in their lander.
One astronaut.
What was the best thing about being in space?
Now, that's a good question. What's the best thing about being in space? Well, it's an experience that's unique. It is one where suddenly gravity is taken away from you. It's one where you can move easily. It's one where you can sort of swim from one spot to the other spot. It's very tranquil, and it's very easy on the body with respect to movements. Lifting is no problem. But then again, over a period of time, if you're not careful, the body deteriorates fast, as I mentioned. And so that is the adverse part of the space flight.
Would you like to be an astronaut today, in the sense that, so the job would be, for example, spending 6 months on the International Space Station? Would that be your kind of thing, or were you more interested in test flying these vehicles and going to the moon?
Well, of course, the experience of astronauts and their requirements changed tremendously over the period of time. We were, of course, quote, test pilots of airplanes and then of spacecraft, and things were new, things were going on, and we had to bring back information. Today, the people on board our International Space Station and going up, mostly in the Soyuz now, are not so much pilots, but they're more engineers, scientists, physicists, are people that utilize zero gravity, utilize the position of the International Space Station to obtain new information about the Earth, looking down on the Earth from top, and also from other aspects of zero gravity and space itself. So I would volunteer to go again. I held the longest time in space with my 4 flights for years until Skylab came along. But I don't think they would take me anymore.
Well, but how old was John Glenn when he flew on the shuttle?
John was 77 when he flew, and I talked to NASA and I said, look, I'd like to be John's backup. They said I was too young.
We've got time for, I think, about 2 questions. You're dying to ask a question, aren't you? You've been we'll take 3.
Hi, this is a question for Jim. Just say it's a real privilege to witness you being here today, Jim. I think everybody would probably agree that what comes across from all the missions is how cool, calm and collected all the astronauts were. But like for Apollo 8 in particular, when you're going to somewhere totally uncharted, first of all, what's going through your mind? And secondly, how do you maintain that self-control and composure in situations like that? And obviously then, Apollo 13 tomorrow.
How do I control the from the explosions?
It's how are you so cool?
Oh. Well, you have to remember the backup of the people that were flying. I had several incidents flying airplanes that the engine quit, you know, and can I get it started again? And so we had that makeup of living on the edge, so to speak, looking for problems as they went along. And actually on Apollo 13, I had no alternative. Alternative. If I could have gotten into a fetal position and waited for some miracle to happen, and I'd still be there. So what you have to have in any kind of a situation, not just in space flight, but any crisis, you have to have a positive attitude. You have to say, okay, this happened. What do I have to work with? What's the best way to get out of it? How serious is the crisis? What do I have to give up to keep going? And without a positive attitude, which is perhaps the best thing anybody could ever have in life, is the way that you think ahead and you have a more successful, a better life to have than if you're always thinking the negative, if you're always thinking that something's going to happen.
We've got this time. Are there any younger members of the audience that are dying to ask a question? There's one right up there at the top. Fitness, you see.
What did it feel like to, what did it feel like the first time you went in space?
What did it feel like the first time you went into space?
Okay, the first time, of course, was Gemini 7. Neither Frank Bourne and I had ever been in zero gravity before. And essentially on the launch, the vehicle and its computer system were doing all the work. We were sitting there like a couple passengers. The G-looting got greater and greater as it went up. The Titan missile is a two-stage missile. When the fuel was depleted from the first stage, just before it was depleted, we were pushed back in the seats about 4 times our weight. And suddenly the engines quit, we go zero. Then the second stage lights to get us up to altitude and on speed. And as that engine continues to burn, as we go faster and faster and faster to get into that Earth orbital speed of about 17,000 miles an hour, just before it quits, we're at 8 Gs, 8 times our own weight, pushed back into our seats. And all of a sudden it stops and we go forward because we're strapped in. And that's when all the washers that the workmen left in the spacecraft were thrown up, you know. And then we were in, zero gravity and zero G for the rest of the flight.
Let's say we should take one from this side of the room. This will have to be the last question, I think, unless others. Yeah. Because it's 6 o'clock and we were supposed to finish at 5:30.
Hi, you mentioned in your talk about when you first arrived at the moon in Apollo 8 and you stared out the window in wonder at the moon, and then how your crewmates on Apollo 13 were doing the same. And I just wondered what your experience of visiting the moon the second time was as compared to the first. Was there still the same sense of wonder there?
It's about what was your experience of visiting the moon on Apollo 13 for the second time after Apollo 8? Because I know in the film, I think your character Tom Hanks steps back and lets them take the windows. So did you do that?
Well, yeah, that's true. I chastised them because we had to get ready to make that burn to get home. And they said, well, you've been here before. It was a little bit, deja vu to be there the second time. I did take the interest in the far side like I did the first time. I was more concerned of how this flight would end. But believe it or not, Fred Hayes, Jack Swigert, in this situation about wondering whether this is going to be successful, forgot about that completely. They were so much interested in seeing the far side of the moon, that they forgot that they were in trouble.
Okay. Well, I think that's very sadly we've run out of time. So I think we thank Captain Lovell again for a superb.